After he is diagnosed with a terminal illness, a billionaire CEO gets a call from a foreign number. "I heard the news. I think we should meet. Dad." The man, thinking it's a prank in bad taste, angrily moves to hang up the phone before freezing in shock at what the little boy at the end of the line says next. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear it. And if you're enjoying the content, give the video a like to help support the channel. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Ryan Maddox had been called a lot of things: visionary, ruthless, control freak, genius, asshole, but never fragile. That morning, as he sat across from a neurologist with a voice like a sleep app, he tried to focus on the words instead of the thin white envelope in his lap. The diagnosis was clear, the scans undeniable. A rare, degenerative illness. No cure, no reversal. It would take his coordination first, then his speech, eventually his independence. Maybe a year, maybe a little more, if he was lucky. The doctor offered the sort of comfort professionals are trained to give: references to support groups, experimental therapies, palliative care timelines, but Ryan heard it all as noise. He nodded once, stood, and left without shaking the man's hand. The car ride back to Maddox Tower was silent. His driver, accustomed to long stretches of quiet, didn't glance at once in the rearview mirror. Ryan stared out the tinted window at a city he no longer felt part of. He had built half its skyline and funded the other half. Now, for the first time in a decade, none of it looked like it mattered. Back in his office, he closed the door, ignored the blinking messages on his tablet, and sat down in the dark. By the time Joan arrived with his afternoon espresso, he had already drafted a plan in his head. Keep it quiet, keep it clean, no pity, no press. Joan set the cup down, glanced at him over the rim of her glasses, and offered her usual verbal jab. "You look like you just lost a hostile takeover, or had lunch at the cafeteria again." Ryan didn't laugh, didn't even smirk. Joan hesitated for a beat, long enough to notice the tremor in his right hand as he lifted the cup. She didn't ask. She never asked until he was ready. "I'll clear your calendar," she said instead, and walked out. The next few days passed in a blur of forced normalcy. He made appearances where needed, signed papers he didn't read, and barked at anyone who dared offer sympathy. At night, he sat in the penthouse he had once redesigned to the tune of $7 million, drinking from a bottle of scotch that cost more than most used cars. The city lights spread out beneath him like a spreadsheet, organized, logical, manageable, and completely useless. That's where he was when the call came. He'd been scrolling through old emails, deleting junk as if trimming digital fat could somehow declutter the chaos in his head. His phone vibrated on the coffee table. A foreign number. Spain, maybe. He considered ignoring it, but his thumb moved without thinking. Curiosity, boredom, something deeper he wouldn't name. "Ryan Maddox," he answered, flat. There was a pause, then a small voice, young, clear, and oddly calm. "Hi, I heard the news. I think we should meet Dad." He blinked, sat up straighter. "Excuse me?" I said. "I heard what you said." The scotch sloshed in his glass as he stood. "Who put you up to this?" "Nobody. I thought you should know. About me. Before you..." The voice trailed off. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Listen, kid, I don't know what this is, but if it's some disgusting stunt, you've picked the wrong target." "I'm not joking," the boy said, and there was something in the tone that stopped Ryan cold. Not fear, not nerves, something closer to conviction. "You told Mommy you weren't ready to be a dad," the boy continued. "You said you'd mess it up like your own did. But I think you should at least meet me before you run out of time. The glass slipped. It hit the table's edge and shattered on the floor. Ryan didn't notice. He stood frozen, phone still pressed to his ear, suddenly breathless. "Who are you?" he asked, quieter now. "Manuel," the boy said. "My name is Manuel Navarro. I'm 11. I live in Valencia. My mum's name is Amelia." The names hit like stones in a pond, concentric circles of memory rippling out. Barcelona, 12 years ago. A gallery opening, a last-minute detour, a woman with paint on her hands, and a laugh that made him stay longer than he meant to, a week that didn't feel like one. Then he left. Clean break. She never called. He never asked. Manuel said something else, but Ryan wasn't listening anymore. His head was full of 1,000 things, and none of them made any sense. "I need to go," he muttered. "I get it," Manuel replied, with eerie calm. "But I hope you call back. I'm not mad. I just want to know if we have the same favourite dinosaur." Ryan hung up without answering. He stood there a long time. The city still sparkled outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, the world moved on. Traffic, deals, dinners. In his mind, though, everything had slowed to a crawl. He stepped over the broken glass, poured what was left of the scotch into the sink, and reached for his laptop. He typed Amelia Navarro into a search bar and stared at the screen as it populated with results. The first few were generic. Common name. Then, halfway down the page, a headline: Valencia artist wins regional mural commission for public school project. He clicked. There she was, same eyes, same smile. Holding a boy in her arms, maybe 5 years old in the photo. Ryan stared at the image like it might disappear. He closed the laptop, leaned back in the chair, and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The tremor in his hand returned, worse now. Not from the illness, but from the quiet, steady collapse of a life built too high on walls, too thick to let anyone in. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't over yet. Ryan barely slept that night. He'd stared at the photo of Amelia and the boy, Manuel, for hours, as if squinting long enough might reveal something fake in the pixels, something he could disprove. But no matter how many times he clicked back to it, the photo stayed stubbornly real. Amelia hadn't changed much. Her hair was shorter, her clothes more practical, but her face was unmistakable. And the boy, he looked like a memory Ryan had forgotten he had. Same jawline, same ears that stuck out just enough. There were pieces of him in that face, and it unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. By morning, the denial had begun to curdle into panic. He didn't want to deal with this alone. He needed someone to give it a shape, tell him he was being ridiculous, or confirm that he wasn't. So he told Joan. Half joking, half serious, he recounted the call while pretending not to care how she reacted. She didn't laugh, didn't even blink, just sipped her coffee and pulled out her tablet. "What's the mother's name?" she asked. "Amelia Navarro. Barcelona, I think. 12 years ago. She was an artist." Joan nodded and started typing. "I'll see what I can find." "That's it?" he said. "You didn't make it up, did you?" "No." "Then let's find out if she did." Ryan spent the next few hours pacing his office. He opened emails and left them unread. Looked over documents without really seeing them. His hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. At one point, he caught himself rearranging the pens on his desk 3 times in a row. By noon, Joan came back. "She exists," she said, setting the tablet in front of him. "Public school art teacher in Valencia. Been there for about 8 years. Low profile, quiet life. not the scam artist type. Ryan looked at the screen. Amelia's name appeared beneath a brief biography for a mural project at a community youth centre. There was a photo, her in paint-splattered overalls, kneeling beside a massive wall of colour. She was smiling, mid-laugh, not posing for the camera. It was like catching a glimpse of something he'd left behind and never thought he'd see again. "There's more," Joan added. "She has a son, Manuel Navarro, 11. Same last name, no father listed on any school or medical records. But," she pulled up another screen, "here's the kicker. A school newsletter showed a grainy image of a science fair winner. A boy standing next to a model volcano, grinning wide. Ryan leaned in, his throat tightened. It was like looking into a time machine. He'd seen that smile before, in old photos of himself at that age. The shape of it, the confidence in it. The stubborn chin that made teachers hate calling on him because they knew he'd argue with whatever grade they gave him. "He's mine," Ryan said before he could stop himself. "You don't know that yet." "I do." Joan didn't argue. She just gave a small nod. "So what now?" Ryan stood, turned toward the window, arms crossed. "I need to see them." Joan paused, then said, privately, "I don't want this getting out. Not until I know what I'm dealing with. I can arrange that. No lawyers, no press, no board members sniffing around. I'll take the jet." "And what if it's not what it looks like?" she asked. "Then I fly back and pretend it was a bizarre dream, maybe buy the kid a PlayStation for the effort." Joan smiled faintly. "What if it is what it looks like?" Ryan didn't answer. He picked up his phone and walked out of the room. By the time the jet lifted off that evening, he still hadn't figured out what he would say. He had rehearsed dozens of versions in his head, each one worse than the last. Part of him wanted to storm into Amelia's life, demanding answers, accusing her of betrayal. Another part wanted to avoid looking her in the eye, knowing full well she'd see the weakness in him. But what really gnawed at him was the quiet voice in the back of his head asking, what if she was right to keep him away? He landed in Valencia under a name no one recognized and checked into a modest hotel that overlooked a quiet square. The concierge handed him a list of tourist attractions, which he immediately threw in the trash. He didn't want to see Spain. He wanted to see a boy who might be his son. That night, he sat in bed with a folder Joan had prepared, everything she could find about Amelia. He flipped through it slowly. After their week together, Amelia had gone back to school, completed her teaching degree, and moved to Valencia. No scandals, no financial trouble, no legal red flags. She had done what people do when they decide to live instead of chase ghosts. There were no signs of her trying to reach him, no letters, no emails, no calls. Just a clean line drawn between the life they'd shared for a handful of days and the one she built afterward. Ryan wondered if she hated him, or if it was something else, something harder to admit. That maybe she had believed him when he'd said he wasn't ready to be a father. That maybe she had actually listened. He set the folder down and opened his laptop. This time, he searched for Manuel. The boy had a small online footprint, mostly school-related, a poetry contest he'd placed in, a goofy photo from Halloween, dressed as a marshmallow with sunglasses, and then a video link buried in a local school's event archive. Ryan clicked. Manuel stood on stage in front of a cheap blue curtain, nervous at first, then loosening as the small crowd laughed at his jokes. They weren't great jokes, mostly about teachers and cafeteria food, but the delivery was solid. His timing was sharp. He even paused for effect. He reminded Ryan of someone, not just in appearance, but in presence. A performer, a charmer, a little too clever for his own good. When the video ended, Ryan leaned back and let out a breath. Not out of relief, but something closer to surrender. He knew, deep down, without needing a test or a signature, he knew. This wasn't just a complication. This was his son, and he was going to meet him. Ryan didn't call ahead. He figured that if he gave himself time to plan, he'd find a reason not to go. So the next morning, armed with a single folded page from Jones' research, the name of a school, a blurry staff photo, and an address, he hailed a cab and told the driver to take him to the edge of town. The school was small and sunlit, tucked between two sleepy rows of cafes and apartment balconies full of drying laundry. From the outside, it looked nothing like the world Ryan had come from. There were no polished metal surfaces, no tinted glass, no guards at the door, just kids running around the courtyard, laughing. A place that felt lived in, real. He walked through the gate, unsure of what he'd say if someone stopped him, but no one did. At the far end of the courtyard, behind a row of planters overflowing with wild herbs, he spotted her. Amelia. She was crouched down, helping a little girl adjust a piece of a paper mosaic. Her hands moved quickly, her focus steady, her voice low and even. She looked exactly as he remembered, except maybe softer somehow, less fire, more gravity. She stood as the girl ran off, and that's when she saw him. Their eyes met. She didn't flinch, didn't fumble. She just crossed her arms and tilted her head, as if she'd been expecting this eventually, and was only surprised it took him so long. Ryan felt every practiced line in his head scatter. "You came," she said. He nodded. "I did." She didn't invite him to sit, didn't ask how he was, didn't mention the phone call, just said, "He called you, didn't he?" Ryan exhaled. "Yeah, he did." "I told him not to," she said, looking off toward the courtyard. "But he's impulsive. Like you." He didn't know how to respond to that. They stood in silence for a few seconds before she gestured toward the bench under a nearby olive tree. They sat down, not quite side by side. The breeze carried the smell of glue and markers, and some kind of citrus from the courtyard snack table. "I didn't know," Ryan said quietly. "You never told me." "You didn't ask," she said, "and I didn't think you wanted to know." "I should have." "Maybe. But you didn't." Her tone wasn't bitter, just final. "I don't want anything from you," he said, sensing the unspoken question. "Not money, not permission, just a chance to talk to him, once." Amelia looked down at her hands. There was dried paint on the edge of her thumb. "He doesn't need confusion. His life is stable. He's happy. I won't let you blow that up because you feel guilty." "I don't feel guilty," Ryan said. "I feel curious." She gave him a look then, not unkind, just tired. "He's a good kid. He's funny, strange in the best ways, and smart, though he pretends not to be. Sounds familiar." Amelia almost smiled. Almost. 10 minutes, that's all. Ryan blinked. "Really?" "In public. Neutral ground. I'll stay nearby. No promises beyond that." "Fine. Tomorrow, after school. There's a park a few blocks from here. He likes the swings." Ryan nodded, unsure if he should say thank you. She stood before he could try. "He's not looking for a replacement," she added. "He's just curious too." The next day, Ryan arrived early. The park was quiet, the sun filtering through broad tree branches, dappled light scattered across the path. He picked a bench, close to the swings, but not too close. Tried to look casual, like a man enjoying the weather, and not someone whose life was about to change in ways he didn't understand. Then he saw them. Amelia walking slowly beside a boy who bounced with each step. Manuel. He was a little taller than he expected, a little messier, with wild curls and a pair of sneakers covered in drawn-on doodles. He carried a large binder under his arm and waved the moment he spotted Ryan. Ryan stood, not sure whether to smile or speak first. Manuel beat him to it. "Hi," the boy said, matter-of-factly. "You look like someone who hates long hugs, so I won't go there." Ryan let out something that almost passed for a laugh. "Thanks for the warning." Manuel sat down on the bench, like they were old colleagues, about to review quarterly results. "So I made this," he said, tapping the binder. "It's got questions, categories, stuff I think we should cover if you're serious about this." Ryan blinked. "You made a binder?" "Yeah. You're a businessman, right? I figured you'd respect a good format." Amelia sat on a nearby bench, just within earshot, but not hovering. Ryan sat beside Manuel. The boy opened the binder and flipped to a tab labelled Favorites. "Favorite food?" "Spaghetti with too much garlic." "Nice. Mine's pancakes, but only if they're uneven. Perfect ones freak me out." Manuel moved to the next tab. "Do you snore?" "Yes, loudly, but I deny it." "Honest? Good." They kept going. Favorite dinosaur, least favorite subject in school, most embarrassing childhood moment. Ryan found himself answering each one with less and less hesitation. Manuel scribbled notes in the margins, completely unself-conscious. When the binder ran out of pages, they wandered toward the swings, still talking. Somewhere, between an argument about jelly bean flavors and a debate over whether the last Star Wars movies should count, Ryan realized he wasn't trying anymore. He was just being. Before they left, Manuel pulled a folded paper from his backpack. "Here," he said, handing it over. Ryan opened it. It was a drawing. A man in a suit, holding hands with a little boy on a rocket ship. The background was space, stars drawn in with a silver gel pen. At the bottom, in crooked handwriting, it read, "Manuel, Ryan. Mission, unknown." Ryan stared at it longer than he meant to. "Do you like it?" Manuel asked. Ryan nodded slowly. "Yeah, I really do." They walked back to where Amelia waited. She didn't ask how it went, just said, "I'll call you." Ryan returned to the hotel that night and laid the drawing on the table. He didn't pour a drink, didn't check his email. He sat in the silence and stared at the picture until the lines blurred and something inside him shifted. He had no idea what came next, but for the first time in a long while, he wanted to find out. Ryan didn't leave the next morning like he told himself he would. Instead, he extended the hotel reservation by 3 nights, claiming it was for closure or maybe curiosity, depending on who asked, not that anyone did. Joan didn't press when he sent the text, just replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a single word, "Figured." He didn't tell her how much time he was spending replaying Manuel's voice in his head, or how that rocket ship drawing was now lying on the nightstand like some kind of fragile contract. The image had haunted him all night, not in a bad way, more like a quiet dare. Amelia was cautious but not cold. She met him outside the school again and made her position clear. No sleepovers, no talk about the future. He's not your toy, Ryan. He nodded without protest. There was something about her tone that made him want to agree, even when he didn't fully understand the rules. So the visits started. Short ones at first, walks around the block, a visit to the little science museum where Manuel spent more time fiddling with broken exhibits than looking at the functioning ones. Then a stop at a tiny, run-down zoo where Manuel loudly announced that the goats were the smartest animals there because they knew when to lie down and ignore humans. Ryan bought him a lemonade, and they sat on a splintered bench under a dusty palm tree, watching a bored monkey scratch its ear. They talked about the kinds of things you talk about when you don't know where to start. Cartoons, school projects, what it's like to live above a bakery and always smell bread at night. Ryan stuck to safe answers. He said he'd grown tired of work, needed a break. He didn't mention anything about the scans or the tremor that had returned in his left hand, or the looming deadline quietly ticking beneath his skin. Manuel looked at him sideways sometimes when he fumbled his keys or winced at a step, but he didn't say anything either. Maybe he didn't want to ruin it. Maybe he was waiting for Ryan to admit it first. One afternoon, Ryan picked him up with a plan. "I need your help with something very serious," he said. Manuel perked up immediately. "You finally going to rob a bank?" "Close," Ryan said. "We're doing an ice cream test." They walked to a nearby shop that proudly advertised more flavors than your brain can handle, and ordered 10 of the strangest options available: cucumber lime, blue cheese swirl, spicy mango with chili flakes, olive oil basil, wasabi crunch. Manuel watched, fascinated, as the clerk piled scoop after scoop into a single cup the size of a salad bowl. "This is either brilliant or criminal," Manuel said, as they sat at a plastic table outside. "Only one way to find out." They took turns rating each flavor with a scoring system Manuel made up on the spot, which somehow included categories like "makes me question reality" and "feels like a dare." They ended up agreeing that passion fruit chili was the worst, but argued fiercely over black sesame. Ryan secretly hated it, but pretended to like it just to see how long he could hold the bluff. Manuel caught him after 3 spoonfuls. "You're a terrible liar." Ryan wiped his mouth with a napkin. "You think so?" "Definitely. Your eye twitches when you bluff." "That's unfortunate. I built a $1 billion company doing that." "Well, maybe they were just polite." They laughed. Not the polite kind of laugh either, but the unfiltered kind that leaks out when you stop worrying about how you sound. And for a few minutes, Ryan forgot entirely about the clock in his chest. After they tossed the leftovers and wiped sticky hands on 2 thin napkins, they walked back toward the school. Ryan talked a little more this time, about the city, about the way people pretend success fixes things. Manuel didn't pretend to understand all of it, but he listened. He listened like he was storing it somewhere for later. At one point, Ryan pulled out his phone and showed Manuel a few gadgets, some new drone tech he'd backed, a ridiculous wearable that tracked your personal mood data through sweat. Manuel squinted at the screen and shrugged. "You know you could have just asked me what I like, right?" Ryan paused mid-scroll. "Yeah, I guess I could have." Manuel looked up at him. "You don't have to try so hard. Just hang out." Ryan shoved the phone back in his pocket. "I don't know how to do this, okay? I didn't grow up with this crap. No one ever taught me." "Cool," Manuel said without hesitation. "So let's figure it out together." Back at the school gate, Amelia waited. She waved from a distance and gave Ryan a careful nod. Manuel ran ahead to show her something about their flavor ranking system, and Ryan stood there watching them, just for a moment longer than necessary. He couldn't explain what exactly had shifted in him over these past few days, but something had. He wasn't better, he wasn't redeemed, but he wasn't distant anymore either. That was something. That night, he stood on his hotel balcony, with his phone in one hand and the city stretching quiet below him. The breeze was warm. The wine beside him was untouched. He called Joan. "I'm still here," he said when she picked up. "I guessed. I think I found the best thing I've ever built." A pause. "Oh?" "And it has spaghetti stains and a missing front tooth." Joan didn't laugh, just said, "Took you long enough." Ryan leaned on the railing, eyes on the moon rising over old rooftops. "Yeah," he murmured. "It really did." Ryan had only meant to stay in Valencia for a few days, maybe a week. Long enough to satisfy curiosity, maybe long enough to ease the guilt he didn't quite want to name. But something shifted after that afternoon in the park. He hadn't expected the boy to be so strange, or so sure of himself, or so blunt in a way that was weirdly disarming. He hadn't expected the drawing either. That rocket ship, the two little figures holding hands, it stayed in his mind like an anchor, something tethering him to a version of himself he'd never planned for. So he extended the trip under the excuse of being curious. It sounded casual enough, harmless. But he wasn't fooling Amelia, and he wasn't really trying to. She agreed to let him spend more time with Manuel, but she drew her lines early and sharp. No picking him up from school, no overnights, no sudden gestures or speeches. She said Manuel had lived his whole life with things he could count on. She wouldn't let Ryan become another unstable orbit around him. Ryan nodded, accepted the terms, and started building his schedule around the time slots Amelia carved out. Mornings he spent on video calls and company check-ins. Afternoons, he wandered museums and side streets with a kid who carried a mini notebook labelled "Things Worth Remembering" and took notes on everything from weird-looking pigeons to how many flavours of gelato existed in one city block. They went to a science museum that had a gravity simulator and a robotic arm that drew portraits. Manuel insisted Ryan try it, and then burst out laughing when the machine gave him an abstract mess that barely resembled a human. They visited a rundown zoo that barely had any animals, but did have a talking parrot that called them both ugly tourists. They wandered bookstores and toy shops and places that sold strange candy with names Ryan couldn't pronounce. On the fourth day, Manuel proposed what he called the ice cream test. The plan was simple: 10 flavours, 1 cup, random picks only. They had to finish it without complaining. Manuel picked wasabi, black licorice, blue cheese, bubblegum, mango chili, and 5 others. Ryan tried hard not to identify. It was disgusting, obviously, but Manuel's commitment to the bit made Ryan laugh harder than he had in months. They didn't talk about the diagnosis. Ryan told him he was just tired of work, needed a break, wanted to see what life outside of meetings looked like. Manuel seemed to accept that, but there were moments, long glances, subtle questions, where Ryan knew the kid wasn't buying it entirely. He pretended not to notice the way Manuel kept offering to carry things for him. Pretended not to see the look in Amelia's eyes when he wiped his palm on his pants to hide the shake. He tried to connect the only way he knew how, through things, gestures, gifts. He bought Manuel a high-end drone with motion sensors and a camera, one that could follow voice commands and return home with a whistle. It was absurd, too much, but Manuel didn't get excited the way Ryan thought he would. He smiled, said thanks, and played with it for a few minutes before asking if Ryan wanted to help him make a comic book instead. That night, while Manuel drew, Ryan sat beside him pretending to read. "Eventually," Manuel said, without looking up, "you know you could have just asked me what I like, right?" Ryan froze. "Yeah, I guess I didn't think of that." "It's okay," Manuel said, still drawing. "I don't know how to do this either." Ryan swallowed the lump in his throat. "I didn't grow up with this kind of stuff, the dad thing." Manuel looked up. "Cool, so let's figure it out together." Amelia watched it all happen from the background. She didn't hover, but she noticed. The way Manuel started talking more, the way his jokes got weirder and longer. How he left the door to his room open now. How he asked for pancakes on days that weren't Saturday. One evening, she stood in the kitchen with a glass of wine, listening to Manuel explaining the rules of a game he'd just made up. While Ryan argued about whether its point system was rigged, she didn't say anything, just watched and listened and smiled in a way that hurt. That night, Ryan stood on the balcony of his hotel room and called Joan. "I'm still here," he said. "Still spying on zoos and eating weird gelato?" Something like that. "And the kid? He's a lunatic. He eats cereal out of a cup and thinks all animals are secretly left-handed." Joan chuckled softly. "So you like him?" Ryan didn't answer right away. He looked down at the courtyard below. The lights were dim. The breeze carried the sound of someone playing guitar on a nearby balcony. "I think I found the best thing I've ever built," he said. "Oh?" "It has spaghetti stains and a missing front tooth." Joan didn't speak for a long beat. "Then maybe don't screw this one up." "I don't want to." "Then stay." "I can't." "Why not?" "I'm running out of time," he said, almost to himself. Joan's voice softened. "Then spend what's left on something that matters." He ended the call without saying goodbye, sat down, pulled out the rocket ship drawing from his suitcase, and laid it on the table. Manuel had written a new line at the bottom the day before. "Mission update. Snacks are critical. Also bring more colors." Ryan stared at it, wondering how the hell he was supposed to walk away from this. He wasn't sure he could. And for the first time in a long time, the idea of not knowing what came next didn't terrify him. It felt right. Like maybe the mission had already started. Ryan didn't go back to New York. He called Joan from the same hotel balcony where he'd first confessed that Manuel might be the best thing he'd ever built, and told her he was staying longer. She didn't sound surprised. "I'll cover for you," she said. "Say you're on sabbatical, some vague spiritual reboot in Europe. They'll buy it for a while." And they did. The board grumbled. Clients speculated. A few blogs ran stories about burnout and mysterious disappearances, but no one knew where he really was or what he was doing, which suited Ryan fine. He moved into a short-term rental a few blocks from Amelia and Manuel. A small place with chipped tiles and a wobbly table, and exactly one decent frying pan. It didn't matter. He wasn't here for the furniture. Every morning, he met Manuel on the corner and walked him to school, pretending not to care when the boy slipped his hand into his without saying a word. Then he'd find a cafe or a quiet workspace and take the occasional meeting, skimming reports, approving budgets, delegating more than he ever had before. Work started to feel smaller, like it belonged to a different version of him. Afternoons were for Manuel. They had routines now. Tuesdays were no-plan days where they wandered the city without a destination. Fridays they made terrible dinners together, often ending up with burned pasta and last-minute takeout. One night they tried to make meatballs and forgot the breadcrumbs, so they used crushed tortilla chips instead. Manuel said it was disgusting in a revolutionary way. Ryan wrote that down in a notebook he kept just for Manuel's sayings. There were dozens already. On a Wednesday in mid-October, Ryan showed up at what he thought was a casual school meeting and accidentally walked into parent-teacher night. He panicked. Sat in a child-sized chair in a room filled with drawings and math posters, surrounded by parents who looked at him like he didn't belong. Amelia found him afterward, smirking. "You survived," she said. "Barely," he muttered. "There was a 15-minute debate about glue sticks." She didn't laugh, but her shoulder brushed his for a second, longer than usual. The days blurred in the best way. They played cards, watched old movies, argued about whether soup counted as a meal or a snack. Amelia joined sometimes, and those nights felt the fullest. One evening, she walked into the living room and caught Ryan and Manuel dancing to some terrible 80s track, both wildly offbeat, Manuel wearing socks on his hands for no reason at all. She stood in the doorway for a long time before either of them noticed. When Ryan finally saw her, she just shook her head and said, "You're hopeless." But she stayed and danced too. Somewhere in the middle of all that, Ryan started writing letters. At first it was just one, to Manuel, for his 18th birthday. He wrote it by hand, slowly, then tucked it into an envelope and placed it in a box under his bed. Then he wrote another, for Manuel's first real heartbreak, then one for when he felt lost, one for the day he graduated, one for if he ever started his own family. Ryan didn't plan them, they just came. Each one started with, "Hey kid," and ended with, "I'm proud of you." Everything was beginning to feel like it might work. Not perfect, not stable, but real. Until it wasn't. It started with small things. Amelia coughed more. At first, she blamed the chalk dust, the cooler weather, the kids at school passing around whatever virus was trending that week. Then she looked pale. Her hands, always busy, started to tremble when she lifted coffee cups or wiped down paintbrushes, Ryan noticed. Asked once. She waved it off. But one evening, just after dinner, she collapsed. Not dramatically, not with panic, just folded down to the floor like her body had decided to pause without asking permission. Ryan got her to the hospital. He called Joan later from the waiting room, pacing, tight-voiced, uncertain. When the doctor came in, Ryan had already prepared himself for a list of instructions, rest, hydration, medication, but the words were different. Stage 4, cancer, advanced. Likely misdiagnosed until now. Too far along for options. Amelia took the news with a strange stillness. When Ryan brought her back home, she sat at the kitchen table with her tea, staring at nothing. Then she said, "Don't tell him yet. He should know." "Not yet," she said. "Let him have one more week of childhood. Just one more." Ryan didn't argue. He just nodded because there wasn't much else to do. That night, after Manuel went to bed, Amelia sat on the couch with Ryan and folded laundry without speaking. She looked tired. Not physically, but in her bones, in the way she moved. Finally, she said, "I thought I had more time. Isn't that always the mistake?" Ryan stared ahead. "You don't have to do this alone." She looked at him then, and whatever wall had been there between them softened. "I'm not," she said. Before she went to bed, she touched his arm and said, "You're doing better than I expected. Low bar. Still, you're trying. I want to get this right." "Then don't run." "I won't. Promise me." Ryan hesitated. "I promise. And when the time comes, you tell him, gently." "I will." Amelia nodded. Then, let's get through the week. After she went upstairs, Ryan pulled out the envelope he'd been writing that day. It had started as a letter for when Manuel lost his first big job. He tore it in half. Then he opened a new page and wrote one for when Manuel loses someone he loves. The ink ran a little from how hard he held the pen. The next day, they made pancakes with faces drawn in fruit. Manuel called it Breakfast Picasso. Amelia smiled. Ryan washed the dishes with shaking hands. One more week. He kept saying it to himself, like a mantra. One more week, one more chance to make something worth holding on to. By the middle of the week, Ryan knew. Not because a doctor said it, not because Amelia told him, but because everything she did started to feel like a farewell. She moved slower, sat longer, stared out the window without speaking. Her cough no longer came in fits. It was softer, but more frequent, buried under breath she had to fight for. Still, she insisted on helping Manuel with his homework, insisted on making the bed herself, insisted on one more batch of her lemon muffins, which burned in the oven because she forgot they were in. She laughed at that. Ryan didn't. After Manuel went to sleep that night, she sat at the kitchen table with her sketchbook, the same one she'd been working on since her diagnosis. She'd been filling it with simple things, memories, doodles, odd notes to Manuel that didn't need to be long. Ryan made tea, though she barely drank any of it anymore. He sat beside her, watched her fingers trace the spine of the book like it was something living. "I want to finish it tonight," she said. "You'll help?" He nodded. There wasn't much to say. She flipped to the last page, looked at it for a long time, then picked up a pencil and wrote, slowly and carefully, "I wasn't supposed to do this alone. Thank you for coming back." The next morning, she couldn't get out of bed. Ryan helped her sit up, adjust the blankets, find her breath. He cancelled his meetings, told Manuel they were having a quiet day. That afternoon, she asked him to bring the camera and her scarf, the one she wore on rainy days when they'd first met. He helped her record 6 videos, one for Manuel's next birthday, one for when he got his first crush, one that just said, "Play this when you miss me." She got through all of them, pausing only when she had to steady herself. He kept the camera rolling, even when she shook, even when she forgot her words and had to start over. She didn't want perfect. She just wanted to leave something real. That night, Ryan stayed by her side, while Manuel went to a sleepover down the street, Amelia insisted. He should laugh tonight, just for a while. She fell asleep around midnight, hand still in his. Around 3 in the morning, her breathing slowed. Then it stopped, quietly, gently, no drama. Ryan didn't move for a long time. Just sat there in the dark, her hand still in his, like if he let go too fast, it would undo everything. He called no one at first, just sat there until the sun came up, then folded the blanket at the foot of the bed and placed it across her chest. He opened the window, let the air in. Then he walked to the neighbours, knocked, and asked if Manuel was awake. He was. They packed up his backpack, thanked the family, and walked home. The sky was cloudless, crisp. The kind of morning that would have been good for errands and jokes, and lemon muffins that didn't burn, but Ryan didn't rush. He held Manuel's hand the whole way, and when they got home, he didn't take him inside. Instead, he took him to the beach. They sat near the water on a piece of driftwood, shoes off, sand cool against their ankles. Ryan didn't use a script, didn't use any of the phrases people use to soften death. He told the truth, slowly, and as simply as he could. That Amelia had been sick, that she hadn't wanted him to worry, that she had held on as long as she could. Manuel listened, without interrupting. The tide came in, nudging bits of seaweed toward their feet. When Ryan finished, Manuel looked at the water, then back at him. "Will she still see my comedy show next month?" he asked. Ryan swallowed. "She'll know you did it, and she'll laugh." Manuel didn't cry. Not there. He nodded and leaned into Ryan's side, and they sat like that until the wind picked up and the beach began to empty. That night, back at the apartment, Manuel brushed his teeth without being told, put on his pajamas, climbed into bed, and pulled the blanket over his head. Ryan sat at the edge of the bed and waited. After a few minutes, a muffled voice came from under the blanket. "She always said we were a team." Ryan didn't know what to say. He reached forward and pulled the blanket back, just enough to see Manuel's face. The boy looked at him with eyes that held more weight than they should have. "Are we still a team?" he asked. Ryan nodded. "Yeah, we are." Manuel started to cry then, quiet at first, then louder. He clutched Ryan's shirt, fists balled into the fabric, like if he held tight enough, nothing else would fall apart. Ryan didn't try to stop the crying. He just held him, rocked gently. When the sobs quieted, he whispered, "I'm not going anywhere. I promise you that." The next morning, Ryan called Amelia's lawyer. There was a folder waiting for him at the office, everything prepared in advance. She had named him as Manuel's legal father. The papers were clean, witnessed, signed, filed. It was all there. Ryan brought the documents home and opened them on the table, letting Manuel see the signature. "This means I take care of you now, all the way," he said. "Like a real dad?" Ryan nodded. Like a real dad. The process was faster than he expected. Amelia had made sure of that. A quiet meeting with the family court. A few formalities. No resistance. No drama. When it was done, he took Manuel to the cafe down the street for hot chocolate and croissants that fell apart the moment you touched them. Manuel asked if they could make pancakes for dinner. Ryan said yes, and they spent the evening drawing new comics together. This time a story about a scientist mom who built invisible bridges between planets, so her son could always find his way home. That night, Manuel fell asleep on the couch in his pajamas, the sketchbook open on his lap. Ryan sat beside him, letting the weight of the day settle. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft buzz of the fridge and the occasional gust of wind outside the window. Ryan didn't turn on the TV, didn't check his phone. He looked down at the boy, sleeping against his side, arms loosely wrapped around him, and then up at the ceiling, like it might hold some answer, some clue about what to do next. He didn't cry. Not then, but his throat ached, and the quiet was sharp around the edges. He kept his hand resting lightly over Manuel's back, felt the slow rhythm of breath. Outside, the stars were out, faint but steady. He didn't move until the sky turned the colour of steel. Manuel stayed curled against him, a small hand clutching his shirt even in sleep, as if afraid letting go might make it all disappear. Ryan sat like that for hours, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because, for the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he was supposed to be. 1 year passed quietly, almost as if time had shifted into a softer gear. Ryan had fully stepped away from the company months earlier. No press conference, no big announcement, just a short message circulated among the board, thanking them for the years, and a final note to Joan that simply said, "I found something better." She sent back a 2-word reply. "Took you long enough." His departure made headlines for about a week, until the news cycle moved on. No one outside of a small neighbourhood in Valencia knew where he'd gone or why, and that was how he wanted it. He moved into the house Amelia had left behind. It needed some work, plumbing that groaned, a fence out back that leaned too far to be symbolic, but Ryan kept it mostly as it was. He didn't want to scrub her out of it. The living room still held the faint scent of linseed oil from her art supplies. The kitchen walls were dotted with old magnets Manuel refused to let him replace. They added their own touches gradually. Manuel's comics went up beside Amelia's framed sketches. Ryan had a shelf of letters he'd written and never mailed. The photos grew in number, some printed, some Polaroid, some drawn in crayon with speech bubbles. In one, Ryan stood in the kitchen, wearing an apron that said, "Grill Boss," while Manuel pointed at a plate of burned toast like it was gourmet. That one hung right above the dining table. Ryan's condition hadn't disappeared, but it had slowed. His hands weren't as steady. He needed to rest more often. He used a cane sometimes when the ground was uneven. The doctors had been wrong about the timeline. Or maybe the timeline had simply bent under the weight of everything else, of routine, of love, of mornings filled with the smell of pancakes and a boy yelling, "Hot sauce doesn't belong on eggs," from the other room. Ryan didn't ask why he was still here. He just was. And he made each day count, because he'd seen how fast they could vanish. Manuel had adjusted in his own way. He asked about Amelia less often now, but when he did, it wasn't with sadness. He left funny poems at her grave, limericks about her overcooked noodles, and haikus about her shoes squeaking in museums. Ryan always brought updates. How Manuel's math grades were climbing, how the garden was mostly thriving, except for that one stubborn basil plant. How he still couldn't figure out how to make Amelia's muffins rise. They'd stand together in silence for a while, then walk home, sometimes holding hands, sometimes just sharing the space without needing to speak. Joan came to visit in the spring. She stepped off the train wearing dark glasses and a scarf despite the sun, and made a show of judging the local cafe's espresso. When she walked into the house and saw the walls covered in drawings and mess, and real life, she said, "You did it." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "You became a person." He laughed, but he knew what she meant. That night, after Manuel had gone to bed, they sat in the backyard under string lights. Manuel had installed with more enthusiasm than skill. Ryan poured her a glass of wine, and she asked him how he felt. He thought for a moment before saying, "It turns out I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of never showing up for anything real." Manuel started organizing something at school not long after, a sort of homemade holiday he called Dad Appreciation Day. It began with him asking Ryan odd questions. "What's your favorite poem that doesn't rhyme? Do you know how to dance without moving your feet?" Then he drafted a script, made handouts, and convinced 2 teachers and a reluctant principal to let him host a small assembly in the gym. Ryan wasn't supposed to be involved. He was just supposed to watch. But 5 minutes before it started, Manuel handed him a folded piece of paper and said, "You're reading this. It's from you to me." Ryan unfolded the letter. It was one of his own, one he'd written months earlier, meant for Manuel's 18th birthday. He looked up confused. "I like it," Manuel said. "And I'm 12. So what?" There wasn't much to argue with. So Ryan walked up to the front of the gym, cleared his throat, and read aloud a letter meant for a boy years older than the one sitting cross-legged in the front row. It talked about choices, and being kind even when it's easier not to be, and how not knowing what you want to be yet doesn't mean you're lost. It ended with a single line. "I'm proud of you, every version of you, even the ones you haven't become yet." There was clapping, Manuel cried. So did a few teachers. Ryan stepped down and sat beside his son, who leaned against him without saying anything for a long time. When they got home, they made toast for dinner. On purpose. Burned it a little. Manuel said it tasted like a tradition. That weekend, they went to the beach. It wasn't planned. Ryan had woken up with more stiffness than usual, and Manuel had suggested air and sand might help. They packed a lunch that was mostly snacks and juice boxes. The beach wasn't crowded. They picked a spot near the water and sat for a long time, watching the waves roll in with the same rhythm they always had. Manuel was quiet for a while, then said, "I used to think dads were superheroes. You know, flying around, fixing everything, being tall and brave and perfect." Ryan glanced over. "That sounds exhausting." "It probably is," Manuel said. "But now I think they're just people who show up. That's cooler." Ryan smiled and nodded. "You're right." They sat a little longer, the sun beginning to dip low over the water, casting everything in a kind of orange that made it feel like the world was made of softer stuff. Ryan reached out and rested a hand on Manuel's shoulder. "I'm never leaving you again." Manuel didn't answer. He didn't need to. He just leaned in and stayed there. And the tide kept moving, and the light kept changing, and the world, for once, didn't feel like it was slipping away. It felt exactly like where they were meant to be. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video. It helps the channel more than you know. Want more heartfelt stories like this? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let me know how this one made you feel. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.